can talk. It's on you right now. You can say hello. Hello, world. Hello, world. So yeah, here I am. Hello, everyone. I'm here with Dr. Adoniya Ogbanaya, the CEO, founder, president, dictator, and master of Activate International.
Oh, God.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah. So anyways, we're going to have some fun today. We're just going to talk about a wide range of topics and, just hopefully inform, where things are heading and just, talk about a whole bunch of range of different exciting things. So looking forward to the interview, and it'll be fun. And we hope it's informative for you just as it is for us, and continue to learn and grow. So I think one thing people don't really know about you is a little bit of your background. You want to share a little bit about, you growing up in Nigeria and kind of your family's background being Jewish and stuff?
Well, I grew up in Nigeria and spent a number of years in Cameroon during the war. And my father was one of those guys who practiced Pei Torah and practiced Judaism. And my father used to have an open vision when I was a kid, and he would talk to me about what he sees. So that background of the Igbos and their Jewish background, their Hebrew background, really helped me growing up. When I gave my life to Christ, I brought that with me.
Mm-hmm. Now, as a child, as a kid, what were some things that you did or experienced, that was part of your culture that, was part of that Judaic background?
Well, there are a number of things. Some of the feasts that our people used to have, which they don't have anymore. The feasts that went on in August during the Passover, when they did the sacrifice, and also the feast when we actually lived in the bush in palm booths built with palms. Those are some experiences we had, and sacrifices that I went to, that I saw how the sacrifices were made. Those were some of the experiences I had as a kid.
Yeah. And how did they impact you in that time when you were a child? Did it kind of did it frighten you? Did it make you did it just cause you to ask questions and wonder, or what was that process like?
I think part of it caused me to ask questions about things, but also one of the things it caused me as a kid, I started seeking spiritual stuff. I started because I heard a lot of stories about spirits, a lot of stories about God, what God does. Then, of course, what helped also was, with that, I also went to a mission school where they taught. So I got to read books that related to what I heard in stories about the Igbos being Jewish and all that stuff. So, but the experiences I had as a kid actually opened me up to the spiritual realm. Because our people at that time were very spiritual and dealt a lot in the supernatural. I can tell you a lot of stories about the things that happened, where people will literally, translocate, and take.
Yeah, go into that a little bit. You want to share a story?
One of the experience was actually having a guy that used to visit my father. We talk about diviners in Africa, but this guy was not a diviner.
Right.
He didn't do the divine. He just came and gave my father a word, like we say in Pentecostal now. You tell my father, this is what's going to happen, so I need you to get ready. I was a kid when the guy started come. My father tells me the guy came when I was born, and that he gave them a prophetic word, that almost everything he told them has happened with me. And when I was growing up, my father would talk about that. So coming from that, this man was a man that will come to the house, and my father and I will escort him. I still remember during the war when the man came to visit our house, we escorted him. And as a kid's eye, my father will escort him to a certain place, and then we'll say goodbye to him, and we'll turn around to leave. I remember looking back, and the guy was not there, So till today, my father has not had conversation. No, not till today. Just recently, my father had conversation with her. He says that he doesn't know where the guy came from, that he don't know the guy's village, that all the guy did was come to visit him. And the way the guy disappeared was at one time when my father wanted to move from Cameroon back to Nigeria before the war. The guy came to my father and told my father, no, do not go back to Nigeria. Stay in Cameroon because the war is going to get more heated, you know. So my father said, okay. So my father escorted him and he left. Then somebody brought a message saying that the guy was dead. And they took my father to the river to go look for him. And they came, but the man's clothes were put together and put on the ground, and they couldn't find the guy's body. So till today, my father believes that it was an angel that kept visiting him. And some other experiences I had when I was young, when I got lost, and an angel actually was with me from my journey, in my journey from a place called Kumba in Cameroon to Douala. I walked on foot as a kid. I was lost. I walked from foot from Kumba to Douala. And an angel was with me throughout my journey in the forest and other places. My father is a witness. My parents were over a year because I had just taken off and started walking and didn't know where I was going. So. And
what were you doing? Like as a kid, like what was your thought process? Like were you just like, I just want to go adventure around, or like what were you doing?
I'm after my parents had sent me to live with somebody, and the person had threatened to beat me, and I was not going to sit around and wait to be beaten. So I started walking that way. Instead of going west, I started going east. So I was going the opposite direction where my parents were living, you know. So that's how that happened.
Yeah. Now, when you were talking about, the angelic encounter that your dad had, does your dad still talk about those things, or are they kind of just one of those things that he told you when you were younger and then he still talks about?
In fact, he was here with me and we talked about that. We talked about things like that. You know, and he talked about it as a kid. But when we were a kid, one of the things my father will get catatonic, you know, like he would just and be looking up in the sky when we're going to the farm. He'd just stop and look up, and for a few minutes we just stay there. So then he told me that he had a vision of this man. That he used to have a vision of this man who was leading people, you know, with the staff, and he used to think that was Moses. He says, you know, but then we'll look at people, multitudes of people following this guy in the sky, in the heavenly realm. And he used to think it was Moses, but he once became a believer that he realized, oh, that's Jesus. So it began to make more sense to him that was Jesus. So many things like that my father will talk about, the visions he will have, the dreams he will have, you know, which is how we actually survived all our sufferings during the war when we lived in Cameroon.
Now, what do you think is the biggest misconception that people culturally and Christians, especially in the West, what do you think their biggest misconception about angels are, or is?
Well, I think that the biggest misconception about angels is that angels walk around with wings all the time. But that we all categorize angels as having wings and looking like human beings.
Right.
I think that's the first problem. But even biblically, there are different categories of angels, different looks of angels. The Bible even describes them.
Right.
You know? So if you look at the cherub in the book of Ezekiel that has 4 faces, then you look at the man that appeared to Manoah and his wife. Then you look at the guy with the ephod, who looked like a priest in Ezekiel. Then you look at Isaiah's seraphims, who carried fire. So, and then of course, if you start reading the apocalyptic literatures, you look at the description of different angelic beings. You look at the book of Revelation, there are different kinds of angelic beings that are described in the book of Revelation. So I think the greatest misconception is people think angels just have wings protruding in their back and need to fly somewhere. There are angels with wings, but it's not really because they need to fly. But we can talk about that some other time. But the movement of angels can be by thought, you know, and they can travel by other means, by in the time space continuum, where they just go through those pockets, and they know how to get through those pockets, those openings in the time space.
So, what are they made of? Are they just, essentially ether, energy? I mean, there's so many different, ideas of what angels are. I mean, are they operating? I know people say, oh, they're fifth dimensional or whatever, but I feel like that's almost limiting essentially in what really they could be, or are they just a prism of a being essentially?
Well, angels are beings, but remember, angels are framed by the mind and the thought of God. But human beings also, in conjunction with their faith, can frame certain beings and can pray until a being is formed. So you pray until an angelic being is formed. So the things that are in the universe, the ancients used to talk about earth, they talk about air, water, fire, and wind. Earth, water, fire, and wind, right? So the Bible, in describing angels, even say that he makes his angels flames of fire. So they are beings that are structured at the level of energy. They are energetic beings, we know that, but they can also take different forms based on what their task is. So I think there are angels that operate based on the principle of water. There are angels that operate based on the principle of wind, because in that passage it says, he maketh his angels flames of fire, and his ministers, which can also be angels, wind, so wind and his as ministers flames of fire. If you look at that passage of scripture, then notice that there are two categories of beings that operate based on the energy system. We with that earth, wind, and fire, or matter in the sense of solidity, and wind, fire, and water are the basic elements that we know in our four-dimensional world. But once we move out of the four-dimensional world, fire can be divided at different levels. Because light has different levels. In fire, you've got gamma rays, you've got radio waves, you got the the X-rays. So, but these are all lights and fire. So the levels of the element by is made is actually based on what frequency and what dimension they function in.
Can you go into that a little bit more?
What do you want to know
about the dimension and the frequency in which they're?
Well, if an angel is invited to operate in this 3-dimension, the angel is going to take a structure, most often of what we know. May take a form of fire, a form of water, but mostly a form of our own solidity. But if that angel is operating at the 4th dimension, which means it's operating between time and eternity, he's going to come in different ways. But if an angel is operating in the 5th dimension, because there are dimensions, then the angel is going to come carrying with it energy systems that are not ordinarily seen in this dimension. Okay, so when Ezekiel moves, when you see prophets, when they move in vision and they move beyond the 3rd dimension, angels begin to look different. Because they are no longer need to see them based on the 3-dimensional world in which they live. So one of the great places to look at this is the book of Revelation, because John was not looking dimensional. In fact, the Bible begins by saying in John chapter 4, and I heard a voice, and the heavens were open, and there was a door in heaven that was open. And I heard a voice saying, what? Come up here. So looking from a higher dimension, you now see John looking at angels that look like the sun, angels that look crazy, that have a combination of different aspects in one being. So now letting you know that angels are energetic systems that can structure themselves in our dimension to make them look real, make them look to us in such a way that it doesn't frighten us.
Mm-hmm.
But in other dimension, they could take different ways of being.
So essentially, they're malleable.
Yeah, they can function and change to whatever they want. Now that shifting, because we talk about shifting and we think it's a terrible thing.
Right.
But the truth is, when your soul, when a human being actually operates in that dimension, they can become whatever they need to become.
Mm-hmm.
You can shift energies from one dimension to another and make it look differently.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So if you take energy from a sixth dimensional world and bring it to the dimension, you have to adapt it to what is happening in this world. Okay. And if you don't adapt it to what is happening in this world, then it can cause chaos.
Right.
You know.
So would you say then, basically, energy and consciousness essentially, the viewer, let's say for me, the viewer, if I go to the sixth dimension and see the angel from that plane of reality, the angel itself didn't shift himself. He's still that. Yeah, it's just me essentially. Yeah. My consciousness is actually framing up his being differently. Is that?
Yeah, because when you get in that dimension, you can actually frame the being, but the angel is also real.
Yeah, I'm not saying it's not real, but let's just, if you were to unravel him essentially in layers, mm-hmm. the higher one goes or out or whatever in your expanded mind, mm-hmm. does the being itself shift essentially to that place in which your mind is interacting with it?
Well, yeah, angels, they will respond to what your maturity level is, mm-hmm. and what your perceptual level is. By the way, and a lot of this journey is, but in order to look at angels in another dimension, you have to look into yourself. We have dimensions within ourselves, mm-hmm. that we haven't tapped in yet. We've been so stuck on the third dimension, we haven't even tapped into what is the gateway of time. So, but if you are able to move, let's say you leave your body, let's say you have access and you get to the sixth dimension, you will see an angel that operates in a sixth dimension. You will be able to actually experience that dimension, and it's not the same as this. This is like taking two triangles and piercing them through each other and bringing them out on the other side. So you're looking at a being that who's showing you different aspects, and you can see you can operate in that. In the spirit realm, anything is possible.
Right. So let's go back to what you just said. You said the gateway of time. How do you view that? What is that?
Well, time is a gateway. Time is the fourth dimension and is a gateway. If we want to travel out of this world physically, right? What do? We look for a time when it's conducive. That means, mm-hmm. there is an alignment in time that allows us to move through time into outer space. So time itself is a gateway. Time is the fourth dimension. That time is what man fell into when he fell. So, but it also has, I believe that the 24 hours of the day that God put are actually gateways to other dimensions. Mm-hmm. So I think that time itself, if we can dilate time has, there are periods in time, seasons and epochs that we can actually move in order to experience the world in a greater way. Our biggest obstacle in moving in outer space and into other galaxy is not the distance, it is time. It is understanding how time functions. And we haven't really worked on how time functions, because time carries with it a gateway. We don't even know how to define time yet.
Right. So how do you define what time is?
Like I just said, I think time is an encapsulation of eternity in a moment. And we've not been able to capture a moment and hold it still. Mm-hmm. So I think time, I know time is a carrier of eternity. It's a gateway that God, it's a prison house with a gateway. Let's just say it that way.
Right.
Because we are in time. We're not out of time. We're not outside of time.
Right.
And time is in eternity. Therefore, there has to be a gateway from time, from where we are, to what is greater, which is from to something that loops upon itself, that never ends. The way we know time now is that time begins and ends. The way we've put it is a construct we've created. So if we're able to open a gateway in time, let's say, for example, now let's use the clock as an example. If I put the clock on the ground and there's a gateway from the 12th from 12 o'clock hand that leads, for example, to the north, and the handle is moving. If the handle gets to 12 o'clock and I'm able to access that in that moment, I can actually get something in the north. But when it shifts, I mean, like just like the earth, the earth shifts around its what? Its axis, and creates time for us in terms of the earth time. But every shift opens a gateway to a dimension that is possible for somebody who lives on earth. Every shift of earth allows us to be able to travel from this dimension, from the earth itself to the moon. There are times we can't really do it. We have not really, we need to have a specific time to be able to do some things. We're getting better at being able to go to the moon without having to wait for time, because we've mastered certain things. But we started by saying, okay, let's look at what time it is. When is it conducive to do this? When is the moon aligned to the earth in such a way that allows us to do so? Time has to do with alignment of bodies in space.
Right. So then it's basically just a constant construct that we're experiencing.
Yeah. For example, the time that is here on earth will not be the time that is in Venus. If you want to go to Venus, then you have to structure what time Venus is connected to the earth.
Right.
Or what time Venus will be connected to the earth in 4 years or 5 years to come. So you're still operating. So time still becomes your gateway to go where you need to go.
Right. Yeah, and it's funny. Actually, I was reading today. Speaking of time, the time in which humanity's actually lived here on this planet.
Mm-hmm.
I was reading an article by scientists whose name is hold on, I got it right here. His name is Dr. Frank Brown.
Okay.
And he's actually discovered the 196,000-year-old anatomically modern human skeleton in Ethiopia in 2005, and published it in Nature on February 17, 2005. So we know that humans have lived here in their modern form for at least 200,000 years.
Yes.
Scientifically, at least. And the clock, it seems every decade keeps getting pushed back further and further and further. So dealing with that, like, how do people experience, or how do they, a lot of people say, well, that's unbiblical because it says it's 7 days, and we don't necessarily need to go into that, but how do you actually view then the 7 or the 10 generations of Adam, essentially, before Noah?
But
the ages.
In my perspective, I look at the ages of what, when you start with Seth, for example, I look at each age as 1,000 years. And I look at each generation as an age of man.
So let's take Enoch's age is 365 in the Bible. Would you multiply that times 1,000?
No, but I would say that his generation was 1,000 years. He just lived 365 of it.
So, but even then, that's still only 10,000 years.
Yeah.
And this skeleton was 200,000 years.
Yeah, but it's not 10,000. Look at it from Adam all the way to Noah. But then if you go back, but you have to remember, Seth is not the first person on earth. There were people who lived before Seth. So I think that we have to consider the years that Adam also was, or the non-years that Adam spent in the Garden of Eden. So we are going back to hundreds of thousands of years, because we cannot really measure before he fell.
So, but they found a skeleton. So I wouldn't necessarily think that it was someone in the garden that died that was buried in Ethiopia.
Yeah. But
nobody
died in the garden.
No one died.
Yeah.
So the body was buried, and they found it it was an Ethiopian, which obviously isn't surprising. Yeah. Do we have to redefine basically? Could we even push? Is it possible that we even we take the years of those Enoch and Seth and all those guys
and make them thousands
and make them thousands?
Yeah, I think we could do that. Yeah. Here's what I think that we need. I think we need to redefine what the fall is. When happened the fall? Where I'm going now is I'm going to the point of saying that what the scientists consider the Big Bang is actually the point of the fall of man.
Okay.
And so that when we are looking at time, that time as we know it that began at the Big Bang probably began at the fall of man, because man did not just live in ordinary time.
Right.
Okay, and that 7 days is not 24 hours. You know, and the question then becomes, how many? How do you measure days when there was no possibility of measuring days the first 3 days of creation? Really, so it cannot be the kind of days that we talk about. Could be thousands of years.
Right.
Okay, so and the sun was not created until the fourth day.
Right.
The fourth day. So again, you have the earth that was created before time could be measured. So, and Adam lived in the Garden of Eden, which is heaven, and in heaven there is no time. If it's the Garden of Eden, even though it's on earth, the Garden of Eden, paradise, is the place where God lives with man, and man lives in perfect harmony with God. Therefore, man is not living in a state which we call day-to-day stuff.
Right.
So it's a different kind of time. So man would have lived there for a long time. So when Adam fell, we don't know if the fall took, how long it took the fall to take its toll on Adam. So when the time of Abel and Cain could have been thousands of years. The time of Cain's children was thousands of years, we know that. So, and again, the question becomes, is our measurement of time the same as the measurement of the ancients?
And how do you see how they viewed time, or how they measured time?
Because I think that our galaxy, for example, is winding down. Okay, maybe maybe that since we are winding down, that there was a different way of measuring time when the sun was not really trying to burn out, when the moon wasn't the way it is today. So if the second law of thermodynamics is taking its toll, then it therefore means that, to me, that something that our measure of the earth is really, our years have shrunk in a sense.
They've gotten shorter.
Yeah, I've got shorter.
Which is maybe why Enoch's, I guess Enoch's calendar was a little bit shorter than ours.
Mm-hmm.
It was just 365 days.
Yeah, but also if you look at Enochian calendar, the writing of Enoch was, we've been told by scholars, happened probably in the 2nd century. I think it's older than that. Okay, I think it's older than that. I think the whole concept is thousands of years, because you're looking at Egyptian. If you look at the Egyptian history, they're looking at themselves as being over 25,000 years old.
Right.
So if they're over 20 years old, it means that man had lived on earth longer than that.
Right.
And one of the things we don't talk about is the fact that we use the word Seth, but Seth is considered also a god of the Egyptians. So the emergence of Seth, what does that tell us? If there's an emergence of Seth, then you've got other groups of people that existed before Seth was born. Maybe the descendants of Seth, which most of us are, could be the ones that have been on earth, for 50, 60,000 years. What about the people that were before them? Because if Seth was born, then Seth has to get married. Where did Seth get his wife from? We keep asking, where did Cain get his wife from? But where did Seth get his wife from? Probably from the descendants of Cain, who have been on earth for thousands and thousands of years.
Right.
They didn't call the name of the Lord because they were scared of the name of the Lord. But Seth brought back the calling of the name of the Lord.
Right. So there was a gap, essentially, in that period between, in that time, in the time of Cain, there was that gap where there was no calling on the name, and it basically got resurfaced. Yeah,
and it resurfaced in the time of Seth.
Right.
And here's another thing that we are not dealing with. Adam came out of the Garden of Eden. So there's no even though it says 800 and something years, they could be that Adam lived for thousands of years.
Right.
Before Seth was born.
Right.
And how many thousands of years did Adam live before Cain was born? Because when the birth of Cain is mentioned, the age of Adam is not mentioned.
Mm-hmm.
And but there are other things we can talk about. Is the Adam who is the father of Seth the same who's the father of Cain?
Right.
So that's a question that needs to be asked.
And?
No?
Okay.
Yeah.
That's fine.
Yeah.
And, one thing that you actually talked about recently, which was, that you alluded to that I had never seen before was, in Cain's generations, there's no end of days.
Mm-hmm.
They don't show any death, essentially, in their line in the Bible. So, do you want to talk about that a little bit, or do you not want to go into that?
We can't go into that right now. But what we need to do is we need to look at what happened to Cain's generation, because they just abruptly ended, and the Bible ended there without telling us who they are anymore. Okay? And then raises the birth of Seth. It becomes like a replacement or a continuation for Adam. So then the question becomes, is the Adam of Seth the same as the Adam of Cain and Abel? Okay? And is the Adam of the garden, which we know has a different nature from the Adam that fell. So we can make a distinction there. But who is this Adam that begets Seth?
I mean, you're really blowing my mind right now. So do you want to?
No,
you don't want to go?
We're just asking a question.
Okay, just asking a question.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I love that question. It's really it's definitely interesting. So, looking back, we can kind of see, humanity's lived here a long time through these large cycles.
Yes.
We at least know just the 25,000 year cycle, and that's one cycle. And we know that there's even bigger and bigger ones.
Yeah. Yes.
So, viewing that, looking back, we can kind of see forward.
Yeah.
And so, where do you see, us heading essentially in the next 1,000 years?
Well, I see humanity, progressing towards what I call a spiritual, a pneumatic based technology, which allows the human body to be able to move in space in a very strong way, which allows human beings to teleport themselves, because we're going to discover that the margins between universes are not as strong as we've thought. So, but I see the rise. I see the race of the Messiah becoming the race that every human being enters into. That the DNA of man is getting transformed by the fact that the Messiah showed up upon the face of the earth, which was God's purpose with Israel in the beginning anyway, is to create a being upon the face of the earth that reflects the being in heaven. So human beings are going to be, whether we like it or not, technology is going to push ahead. And if those who know God don't want to handle it, it's going to be giving to those who don't know God. And they're going to do what those who don't know God, those who are evil, to do with. So we need to, as human beings, we need to begin to train ourselves to actually be able to handle the kind of breakthrough in technology where the atmosphere itself can be framed to bring forth things. And if you can frame the atmosphere from the molecules, frame the things in the atmosphere to bring forth stuff, then you need to, by the way, this is the reason for the teaching of love in the scripture, so that the heart of man is not desperately and full of wickedness in such a way that it's purified, so that when it frames things in the universe, it doesn't frame it for destruction and for the hurting of its fellow human beings and the creation.
Yeah, keep going.
I see us moving. I see this generation actually being the Enoch generation, that actually begins to prepare for the movement of humanity into a new realm, for the manifestation of the full body of the Son of God. Of the third Adam, if you may,
Right.
which is humanity becoming the body of the Son of God, body of God,
Right.
that becomes a manifestation of the God complex, if you may.
Right.
Yeah,
and I think there's going to be a lot of, if and I do agree that we obviously are heading in this direction. There's going to be a lot of conflict, I think, even just within different denominations, different belief systems, different cultures, as we kind of are dealing with these philosophical questions of really who we are, where we're heading. And I mean, there's going to be, we're kind of already in that place, even, with other John MacArthur and other people, not even being really open to spirituality, Or do you think as the generation passes, as more children are born into this higher framework of being, that just these petty arguments we have now essentially are just going to kind of fade?
Yeah, I think the next generation, who are not baby boomers, have a greater grasp of what we're talking about than those who came up the baby boomer world.
Right.
So because why? Because they are wired with the capacity for innovative technology beyond what we have seen since the destruction of the ancient technologies. Since the removal of Egypt and the removal of Greece and the removal of ancient China, if you may, and all those ancient civilizations that had some form of organic technology.
Right.
I won't use the word organic, but when I say organic, I'm talking about something that is ethereal in nature.
Right.
That fused itself with organism, that you didn't need a lot of the tinkering that the human mind can actually meld with it, in order to allow the earth to produce greater things, to do not these technologies that messes up human stuff. There's
Right.
a different kind of technology
Right.
that actually flows from the spirit, that flows from the divine, that allows humanity's that comes true because of humanity's participation in the divine, not the tinkering of stuff and negativizing them. So that which flows from God is going to be different. The technology is going to be different from what we are seeing today. In fact, machineries that we are seeing today are going to get to the point where they operate by an organic interaction with humanity. So that it's not just using iron or specific type of iron, but the kinds of things, the kind of minerals or metal we're going to find are going to be metals that can actually interact with the human organic system,
Almost like an intelligent material.
And they can interact with the human mind, and we're going to have stuff like that where it will shift according to the thought of the person that is using it. So but we have to look at where this started. The key issue is, for us as Christians, God did become a human being.
Right.
Okay? God did become a human being, and in becoming a human being, took all of humanity into God's self for the purpose of redeeming humanity and gracing humanity with the divine mindset, so that humanity can come to the place of its maturity and do in creation what God did, do in creation what God did in the beginning of creation. That's we are being called to take certain responsibility. Otherwise, God would have not become one of us. If you look at the coming of Christ, then you notice that in Christ God dwelt fully,
Right.
and Christ dwelt fully in God. The people now who live on this side of the incarnation, those who believe, have this connection. They are also interliving, if you may. There's a mutual indwelling between the Father and the Son, and there's a mutual indwelling between us and Christ, because we believe in Him. But the goal is for the whole of humanity to have this mutual indwelling with the Son, and the Son then being mutually indwelt, having a mutual indwelling with the Father, takes us with him so that we become participants in that divine cycle. And when we get to the point where we're part of that divine cycle, we're talking about causing things to come into existence that did not exist before, because we are now working in conjunction with divinity in a mutual indwelling where we manifest the mind of God because we have the mind of God. The Bible even goes says that we have the mind of Christ. You know, it says, who knows the mind of God?
Right.
Have advised him except the Spirit of God, right? And then it says, but we have the mind of Christ.
Right.
And having the mind of Christ means we have the mind of God. So what you're asking is what's going to happen in the future. What I see happening is more and more people coming in alignment with the mind of God through Christ, and more creation, more of humanity doing that, and therefore changing how human beings interact, how they fabricate, how they look at technology, how they create stuff, how they look at space travel, how they look at time travel, how they look at bilocation, translocation, teleportation, because all that stuff is fulfilled in the person of Christ. You know.
Yeah, it's all right. Just it's all good.
So
yeah. So I mean, it's all of that is, you know, it's I think it's an exciting future, you know, and I think, but it's just funny right now. It feels like we're kind of in this like birthing stage almost, you know, where there's just a lot of that we still have like the petty arguments of the 20th century, you know, but I guess that's all just going to fade over time.
But the petty argument has been there for a long time. It began in heaven. It didn't begin here. So, but where we are is that we are moving towards the end of it, because in the fullness of time, God caused his Son, made after the likeness of a man, right?
Right.
Who in whom, you know, who became, the Bible says, as by one man sin entered the world, by one man all, you know. So this coming, when people say, why do you emphasize Jesus so much? Because the coming of Jesus Christ marked the turning point in humanity's history, leading humanity back to the fullness, to its full participation in the divine. You know, it's mutual indwelling of the divine, so that we can begin to heal a lot of that thing that's happened, because it started in heaven. Because the last thing, the Bible says, the last thing that shall be done, what? That shall be removed and cast into hell is what?
Death and
Hades.
Yeah.
And he says, and the one who deceived us, who caused all the thing, is going to be ruined. Now that's something we should talk about in the future. Who actually gets cast into the abyss? The scripture doesn't talk about casting a human being into the abyss.
No.
It talks about casting the devil and the serpent, death and hell, into the abyss.
It just specifically says just death and Hades, right?
Yeah.
So, but death and Hades are basically a would you say they are more of a causation of our falling? Death is more of like less of a being and more of like
it's a consequence.
It's a consequence.
Yeah.
So it's not really a being, it's more of an idea that's getting cast.
Yeah, but it's a space.
Okay.
It's a space and a topos and an act. Okay? Death is not an idea. Death is a reality.
Right.
That is in man.
Or would you consider it a reaction?
Well, it's a consequence.
It's a consequence.
It's a consequence. And if you remove a consequence, then it never happened.
It never happened. And it's essentially casted away.
It has never existed. So by removing the consequence, which is what God's doing actually, which is actually what God did with us when he redeemed us.
Right.
What God did was he took away our sin. Right? If Jesus took away our sin, then we never committed it.
Right.
And that's the thing, it does not exist. Because removing the consequence is removing the product, the way it was produced.
Right.
So it goes back and forth, you know. So if you deal with the present, you change the past and you change the future.
Right. And it's funny because, you know, right now we have I guess you could say, the spiritual idea of it, but even in the scientific and technological world, this is the number one thing that the billionaires are putting their money into.
Yeah.
Larry Page and all these different guys at Google and whatnot, they're trying to find to break the code, essentially.
Yeah.
And they're even saying now that they think someone alive today is going to be the first person that lives to at least 1,000 years, biologically changed.
Yeah. Well, but that's precisely where we are. Is that I think that that the church is missing the point when we talk about living on earth for 1,000 years, and we keep thinking that there's going to be an Armageddon and we're going to have all this destruction. But the truth is,
by the way, that was Armageddon.
Yeah, whatever.
That was your
my accident.
Your accident.
So it's not Armageddon, it's Armageddon.
Okay, that's fine. Independence Day.
That's right. So but if you look at the process, you notice that the wars that we are talking about has always been there. Yes, Israel may be attacked. Yes, all of that stuff, but Israel has always been attacked. The world did not come to an end when Assyria overtook Israel.
Right.
The world did not come to an end when the Babylonians conquered Israel. The world did not come to an end when the
Romans.
When the Persians.
Oh, the Persians
overcame. It didn't come at an end when the Egyptians overcame Israel. So, and it's not the world is not going to come to an end when we have all of that, and the problem we are going to have in terms of defining what we mean, we say then Christ will come and will live in this physical Jerusalem, and then people will live for 1,000 years.
Right, they call that the 1,000-year reign.
He will reign for 1,000 years. So is he going to reign for 1,000 years on Jerusalem while people are dying? Everybody around him is dying? No, but he's coming with people who are going to reign with him for 1,000 years. So in other words, the scientists who are already saying that somebody is going to live for 1,000 years understand the scientific and technological process that stuff is prophesying, because it's a prophetic word about humanity. It's not just a prophetic word about heaven.
Well, couldn't you say, though, that the 1,000 years is kind of symbolic, though, or figurative? Does it have to be an actual... No. Because it's not like, it's December 25th, 2001. Oh, it's over December 25th, 3001. You know what I mean? Because people take it to be a literal...
it's not a literal 1,000 years.
1,000 years. The dispensationalists, at least.
So there's going to be a dispensation of people who are able to live for 1,000 years.
At least.
Or
that's figurative for basically meaning
and
living
we
forever,
as Christians believe that it is mostly people who know Jesus Christ, who have accepted his life, who have been infused with the eternal life that is in him, that even though we might do a lot of stuff, that we believe that the reason this is possible is because Christ came into the world.
Right. Well, and I think another thing that's interesting is, they're saying... possibly, hey, if your heart stops working, we can at least give you an electronic or some sort of basically a metal heart that'll basically be like a physical heart. So I mean, how will we deal with this when humans kind of get to this point where they're 50% biological and 50% technological?
I think that is a transitional moment.
Okay.
It's not the end of it. I think the fear we have is what's going to happen when we do that, but that's a transition.
Right.
It's a transition that will allow humanity to perfect its capacity to create organs that will actually take the place of the heart, create hearts, and create limbs.
Right.
In fact, they're doing it already.
Right.
So, I mean, I'm not one of those going to sit around and say, well, we cannot sit around and just wait for people to create hearts.
Right.
Yes, if they create it out of the DNA of the individual. I think the time is coming when we can use somebody's own DNA, tissue from their blood that is compatible with them, to create a body part for them.
Right. So essentially we'll just be continually genetically reproducing.
It's a genetic reproduction. Yeah.
Right.
But the danger of that also is that we're going to get, because of the Enochian rise, because of the rise of Enoch, we're going to also have those who create beings that are mixed with other genetic structures, which then becomes the problem for humanity.
Right.
Because as in the days of Noah, we're going to have people mixing animals with human stuff so that the genetic principle get confused, and it becomes a problem for the humans So the question becomes, how do you maintain? I mean, we're going very deep into this. We're talking about all.
This
all
is
this
good though. This is what we want to talk about.
The question becomes, how do you maintain the genetic well, it's a purity, but let me use the word purity just because of a lack of a word.
Right.
How do you maintain the genetic grace of humanity and don't compromise it with the serpent's genetic system?
Yeah.
Or with humanity. That's again. This is where humanity must then develop a heart that honors God and honors humanity as humanity.
Right.
So, but if we don't honor humanity as humanity and don't honor humanity as created by God, ergo we don't honor God, then we put ourselves in a position not only with the capacity to create organs from human genetic structure, but we put ourselves where we create organs from other entities that then infects humanity and causes us to create beings that we cannot control.
Right. So I mean, and another thing too, as I was talking about the mechanical nature of what we're doing, I mean, I was listening to another guy talk about how, with quantum computing and the whole idea of kind of creating artificial intelligence, they're discussing, the higher ups of Google and stuff, they're discussing how do you actually transfer the consciousness of a human from their carbon-based body into basically a metallic mechanical thing. I mean, would they still be human?
Well, then the question becomes, when you redefine human beings, then you have a problem. Now, but I think this is one of the things that that I want to say. We're going to find metals that are organic in nature, because there's some level of metallicism in us, just as human beings.
That's good. So
the question then becomes, where do we find that kind of material that allows for the human being to operate at that level? Can you transfer human consciousness into a metal?
That's what I'm asking.
The answer is yes. Do you want to? The answer is no.
Why?
Because if the metal, for example, if metal is not organic in nature, then you're creating something that may end up changing human genetic system in a way that it may not be acceptable or may not allow humanity to survive.
Or could it essentially imprison them?
Yeah. So, but here's the thing: can you transfer consciousness to a metal? And the question becomes, is it a real consciousness? Because you're asking, can you transfer the soul of a human being into stuff?
Exactly.
Why you can transfer thought and algorithms into these machines, you can't transfer a soul into it.
You don't think so?
No.
So, but what if we were able to find these different metals possibly that are,
organic.
Or organic, essentially.
Well, but I think
that are still carbon based.
I think we still need a technology for understanding how the energy system of the soul works and how we can transfer. And so far, only God knows how the soul works, and we're not even sure that the people we clone have souls.
Right.
So we have not really mastered, and that's why technology. We're going to come to a place where we have a great conversation about this, But technology, does not just have to deal with the human body. If our technology becomes pneumatic, which means it operates from the realm of the spirit downward, everything we know, then we won't even be talking about imbuing a mechanical object with a human soul.
Right, because it's still a lower.
Yeah,
it's
because
looking from a lower.
Yeah.
Up.
So, but if you're looking at it from a spiritual realm, then you're looking at the capacity to actually create stuff based on a God principle.
Right.
Which literally, see God, look, this is God made made human beings in his image, right? In God's image.
Well,
yes.
That's literally what I was just going to ask them, because if what makes man is essentially his consciousness and what he's able to become and do, then the body itself is necessarily the image. It's the essence of what man is the image.
But the body. No, I think it's more than that. I think it's more than that. I think the structure,
or the form of the body.
I think the structure of the body is made that way by God, in Christian theology.
Right.
Because God values the human body, the physical body. In fact, the Christian theology is God will raise the body up, but it's a different kind of body whose structure has undergone the divine technology of being able to move through walls. Remember, 2 Sundays ago, I think a few Sundays ago, I talked on the implication of the resurrection of Jesus Christ for humanity.
Right.
Here you have a body that can walk through walls. Here you have a body that can think and be somewhere just by thought. Here he has a body that will not die anymore. That knows in immediacy, because he's God, of course, but he's a resurrected human being, right? He's got all of this stuff. So the human physical body is necessary for humanity. That's how God made it, and there is a technology that can allow it to enhance itself to the point of receiving. So, biblically, we have to be careful, because according to all the legends we know in Scripture, not just in Christian Scripture, but in ancient Near Eastern literature, the mixture of human DNA with something, well, human consciousness, whatever you want to call it, into something else, is what then leads humanity and the world towards a path of destruction. So that itself is so. You're moving human consciousness into a cup, or moving a human consciousness into a key,
right?
Doesn't make it human. Because God has a purpose in the beginning for infusing the structure of the human body, including the DNA that is in humanity, and infusing it all the way down to the tiniest cell with Himself.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? So the cells of the body of human beings are important. In fact, the Christian scripture goes so far as to say that God will raise a human being up from the dead. Why raise the body up from the dead if the body is not vital? So anything that does, we have to question if that can be human, because a human being is not just his consciousness. A human being is spirit, soul, and body.
So then, So then, what makes human essential? What makes a human is the spirit, the soul, and a body, or the soul within the body.
Is the synergy of the three.
It's the synergy of the three.
A soul.
But wouldn't you argue maybe that a human doesn't have a spirit until? Yeah,
but a fallen human may have died, which means he has no access to the spirit, as well as death. So the only way that...
But wouldn't you say he has access to at least the astral plane?
Yeah, but that's the soul.
Yeah, the soul.
Yeah.
And his consciousness.
Yeah, and the soul, which is his consciousness.
Right.
Okay? His soul, which is his consciousness. So because the soul is conscious.
Right. So he would be conscious in the astral plane.
Yeah, but he will not be a human being operating in the physical plane.
Right.
It may be able to impact, and we don't have a technology for talking like that, because for Jesus to act the way he acted, he had to resurrect with the body. The question becomes, what kind of a body is it? The glorified body.
Right, but that could just be a term for, a light body, or
some
sort of scientific
a
principle.
physical body can be a light body.
Right.
It doesn't mean it's not physical in nature.
Right.
Okay, but my question becomes, can it be metallic? Can it be something that artificial? Because I think that the way God made man is for him to operate in this plane, he needs a body, and that body has a structure, and that structure, that God gave to the human body has a purpose.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I think the question you want to ask me is why then did Jesus say, that those in that body don't give to birth, they don't give marriage, they don't get married, neither do they give to marriage.
Right.
Okay. That is the question that people like me who talk about this have to answer. Okay. So if you can't give to birth, then it means that the structure of the body, physical body, is not necessary for productivity.
Yeah.
Could there be a capacity of the soul? But okay, if you have a possibility of the duplication of the soul, the multiplication, the purification of the soul, based on the spirit, based on the fact that you are in the spirit, then you don't need the body for an occupant, the physical body the way you have it, in order to generate. Right. You don't need to generate.
No.
But you need the body for function within this plane. And here is where the issue is, because I think that in this plane, that the physical human body is necessary to maintain the equilibrium of what happens in this plane, unless we remove the physical plane.
So essentially, the human body itself, the physical human body, will still be necessary. However, it's the way that it interacts with organic material today, or carbon-based material, will change.
Will change, yeah.
Right. And so it could be the human consciousness that basically affects that sort of material,
yeah.
or what do you think?
I think that's what I'm talking about. Things being pneumatic,
right?
Because we are going, when this shift happens, there's going to be a flow from the spirit here,
right?
Not a push from here there,
right?
It's a different kind of. So we've been pushing from here to there,
right?
The reason we need all of these mechanics, we need all of this stuff, is because we're pushing from here to there. But if you're there, I use there, if you are in the spirit and you're operating from the pneumatic space.
When you say in the spirit, how would you define that scientifically? Because I know we kind of throw that term around a lot. Is that the same as an exosomatic experience in the dimensions?
Well, I believe it's more than an exosomatic experience. Because man is spirit. Man is a spirit, right?
Right.
When God created him, he fell. Therefore, his spirit is, as far as I'm concerned, is actually non-existent, right, until he gets born anew, until he gets born from heaven.
Right.
Then the spirit comes back. Then the soul, when the soul can subject itself in the spirit, and the body comes under subjection of the soul, so that it's not the soul being subject to the body, right, and then the spirit being out there.
But I think one thing that I think it gets thrown around a lot, like, I was in the spirit, or whatever, but they're not realizing that it's a fully conscious experience of being out of your body.
Well, we can talk about that when we get our next listing, when we talk about our next stuff. But the issue is, most people who talk about the spirit have never been in the spirit.
Right.
They've imagined they're in the spirit. They've felt they're they may have been in the spirit, but they're not conscious of being there.
Right.
So a real being in the spirit is a consciousness of being in another realm. Is a clear consciousness of being in a different realm in the universes that God has created.
Right.
It's a movement of the soul into the realm from whence it was hewn.
So could you say that essentially in the spirit means in a higher dimensional plane?
Yeah, it means leaving this physical plane and being in another plane where the soul is operating inside the spirit, which is God, that can move in all the dimensions of the universe.
So then, going back to your original point, then from that place of the higher dimensions of being in the spirit there, you said that's where it will then flow out and start to affect the organic nature.
Yeah, because anything we do from this section that we come from here, we go still. Death is still going to surround it. We want to heal somebody. We have to infuse the medicine. We put healing, but it always comes with what? With a poison in it. But the FDA knows that you cannot do anything on this side. If you do anything on this side that you brought from nature that doesn't have a side effect, then it won't work.
Right.
Okay? Because the human body needs that balance the way it is now.
Right.
Okay? But if you operate from that realm coming this way, then you can create a harmonic resonance, or whatever you want to call it, that doesn't need the infusion of the negativity in order to balance, because good will balance itself out.
Right.
But that's where the spirit is coming from. Okay. But remember, we are talking from this side of the fall.
Right.
But if we can talk from the other side of redemption, where we are operating from who Christ is in his fullness, in God's fullness, where God wants humanity to be, if we operate from God's side this way, it turns everything different. Because you're operating from a place where there's no fall. Not every heaven doesn't have a record embedded in it of the fall of man. The devil was kicked out of heaven, so the record is not there. So when we approach from the throne, based on the redemption that happens, when we approach from the throne towards us, what happens is we're coming as though nothing has ever happened.
Mm-hmm.
So man is then seen from the perspective of God's mercy and God's redemption. And so it flows. Remember, we're going back to looking at creation from Genesis.
Right.
And God saw that it was good.
Right.
There's not one place in that creation story that God did not say it was good. So, and by the way, seeing from that
doesn't the second day he doesn't say that it was good?
But he doesn't say
that it was bad.
That it was bad.
He's just neutral about it.
It's a neutrality is not evil.
Is that because it basically was the day of dualism?
Yeah. It is the day of dualism. That's really because God divided the waters above from the waters below.
Right.
So
it was the division he was balancing. Mm-hmm. He didn't call it good so that it would because
if you said it's good, then you have to come back into oneness and unity.
Right.
So God did not speak because they needed that space. And by the way, it is also the creation of a space, an atmosphere in which other beings can exercise their creative capacity.
Right.
Because God was looking forward to the seventh day when God will now release God's image to fulfill and bring and be the one to now deal with creation from that moment on.
Right. And it's funny because all of this that we're talking about now, when I hear different people talk about like, oh, we're so excited for this revival because, some people are drunk and laying on the floor or whatever. It doesn't really feel like that's essentially even necessary anymore because of what we're talking about right now. If this is where we're heading, a revival would be a complete shift in the human mind in its ability to essentially operate in these higher dimensions, wouldn't you say?
Yeah.
And our interaction with this place becoming greater in its change.
Yeah, but I think we actually need to discard the word revival.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say.
We need to throw away the word revival because a revival is reviving something that's dead.
Right.
Okay? A resurrection is different from a revival.
So what would you call an awakening? Or a shift?
I will call it a jump.
A jump.
We need a revolutionary jump. We need a quantum jump.
I think that's great. I think that's what we need to start calling it.
And we need a leap.
Yeah.
Into a different, because whenever we keep talking about sending a revival, okay, evangelicals want to bring a revival from the days of Jonathan Edwards, where no Indians were involved, black people were not involved, no ethnic other group were involved. It was just them.
Right.
So revival is them gathering together and having something alone.
Right.
The first revolution, which I don't think is a revival, and I don't think Azusa Street is a revival, because it didn't revive anything.
It was a jump.
I think it was a leap.
Yeah.
That the whole church and humanity took. Can I say this? And there's a word that I think but the whole church and humanity took an Enochian leap in what happened in Azusa Street. It was an Enochian leap of humanity. Because it changed even the denominations. Every denomination that is Christian has been impacted by that jump.
Right. Even the waves of that. I'm a part of that wave of that change that happened. Yeah. But not Jonathan Edwards' jump. No.
That one did not impact. It didn't impact the world.
Yeah. And it's funny, even when we talked about the revival, it's funny because every group has their idea of what revival should be. Yeah. And it's not exactly a jump or a leap.
Yeah.
So I think you're right. I think we do need to discard that term altogether, no longer even bring it, and bring jump into the consciousness of the body.
And I think that's what happened in Genesis. To get back to what about Genesis, that some jump happened where Adam then gets Seth, and Seth now changes the structure of the world by the things that came out of his mouth. Men began to call the name of the Lord, and that became a generation that prepared again for the coming of the Messiah,
Right.
which is what that jump in Seth is put in scripture specifically because he called the name of God first. He began to call upon the name of the Lord, and that calling of the name is what flowed through that generation to bringing forth Shem, who brought forth Abraham, who brought forth Israel, who brought forth the Messiah.
So then the story of the Tower of Babel, is that basically, obviously there was a jump that was happening there.
Yeah, of course.
But what essentially was happening that God's saying, okay, you guys are going to keep jumping and you're going to get to this point. However, don't do X when you get to this point in your ability as a species.
Well, I think part of it is humanity's, again, it's all about humanity trying to set an agenda based on artificiality. And I like the AI stuff because it's called artificial.
Right, yeah.
It's called
So
artificial.
it was coming from here.
Yeah. And it wasn't even coming from here.
Okay.
It was coming from inert matter.
Right.
Because they were doing bitumen. Right? He said they gathered mud and they used slime. I like the King James version. They use slime. That word is so powerful because they use slime for mortar, and they use the baked brick. So what they were doing was completely artificial. Therefore, it did not engage their spirit with God because they were moving in the area of artificiality and creating a system that will allow them to get into God without having to have a God consciousness.
And do you think that's possible with Christ consciousness and now essentially being implanted through the blood, or is you think it's still possible we could enter some sort of Babylonian cycle?
I think we are going to. I think part of the process of getting to the kind of technology I'm talking about is going to the Babylon of artificial intelligences that are based on destructive principles. That will help, but won't help because they will be mainly for the purpose of making money. They're not really for the enhancing of human life.
I see.
We haven't really gotten to that point. The pneumatic process will then be a process that does what? That impacts humanity backward, so that humanity is looking at the whole, not just at what an individual can gain from it, but also looking at the wholeness of humanity, body, soul, and spirit. I keep saying that.
That's good.
So
No, I'm loving it. Yeah. Well, you want to do a couple more minutes, or what is
your question?
Well, I mean, talking about the jumps and the leaps, would you consider maybe then, because we don't have a lot of evidence other than the Sphinx, some pyramids, some hills that we can see right now. Obviously, we're seeing more with the
sonar radars,
with the sonar radars and all the geopolitical, looking from space. The geographic. So these previous generations of humans, did they get to a point where basically they jumped and left? And is it possible that what we're experiencing with extraterrestrials could be possibly humans that have already jumped and left and are coming back?
That's a possibility.
It is a possibility, right?
That's a possibility. It's a possibility because I don't,
because Enoch did, with a group of people.
Yes, yeah, they moved around the galaxy. They did some things. He was seeing stuff that we have no clue, and it wasn't just looking at it. I think it was doing inner space because inner space leads to outer space. But I also think that these guys did see stuff out in far out galaxies that we have no clue are even there.
So, I mean, it's possible now, generations, or even in our generation, especially now as we're starting to see Mars, and these other things are going, wait a minute, there's structures here. So, clearly, other things have been there.
I am one of the people that don't believe that the Earth is the only place where beings are. Because these vast universes that God created, these worlds that God created, cannot be devoid of other kinds of beings.
Right.
They can't. I mean, we talk about seeing angels. Okay, are angels just in heaven? No. Maybe some angels are even beings that may have traveled from an uncorrupted part of the universe of creation.
Which, and I think
which went into bondage only because of humanity.
Right. And I think the confusion people has, well, how the heck did they travel in a spaceship? Well, they're not traveling, distance, time and space. They're leaping because they have the technological.
But it's non-locality.
It's a non-locality. Yeah, they're.
I mean, how did Jesus travel? He didn't have a spaceship.
Right.
See, I think Christians, when they ask that kind of question, show the fact that they don't know the Bible.
Right.
How did Philip travel? The chariot that Elijah traveled was made up of fire.
Or they described it as fire.
But for human beings, it was the whole structure. The horses were fire. Everything was fire.
Right.
So, if which is a different kind of energy system.
Right.
It's an energy that manifests at a certain vibration, a certain level.
So it's possible what we consider ETs are essentially, they could be, or what we consider angels now, in the sphere of it, could also be what people are experiencing with ETs and vice versa.
Yeah, could be, because we know. For example, one of my favorite texts is the one with Manoah, the Manoah and his wife, the parents of Samson, where the guy appears out of nowhere to the woman and tells, "You're gonna have a child," and she goes, and then he disappears, and she tells her husband. Her husband says, "What are we supposed to do for the child?" So I want to hear from the man myself. So he goes out there and he says, "Lord, if you're the one that sent this guy, let him show again." So the guy shows up, right? And he has confidence. And the guy said, "This is what you do, this is what you do, this is what you do for the child." And he says, "Okay, since you have come to help us, stay around so that we can feed you." Then they say, "What is your name?" So that we can honor you.
Right.
And he says, "Why do you ask my name? Seeing that my name is wonderful," which can mean seeing that my name is secret.
Jeez.
All right. So he says, "Okay, since you insist I eat, why don't you put the cake on top of the stone?" So he puts it on the stone. The guy points his rod to the stuff, and it catches fire, and it goes up on the smoke. And the thing about we know from the principle, from the issues of people who claim to have been teleported,
right,
is that a smoke or a cloud shows around them, and all of a sudden they are someplace else. And there are many documented stories of people doing that. So my thing is, I think it's time for many people in some of the churches to stop every time something like that happens, say it's demonic. When somebody is caught from one dimension and appears in another town, they say it's demonic. Why must it be demonic? Now, if it's demonic, you show me what your God can do.
Right.
Is your God limiting humanity so much that humanity cannot go from one room to another without walking through a door?
Right.
But if the whole universe is created by God and human beings are able to go through, that is through the mist. Some people go through fog. I told you guys about my wife and I going to Texas. We were traveling to Texas from Chicago, and we were running late. And we stopped at a place to rest. We rested. Then we decided we're going to drive. We thought we thought there was a fog. It wasn't until we were driving, and our time was cut in half arriving in San Antonio. But we went into a fog, and we found ourselves at the edge of San Antonio driving. And we thought we'd been driving. Then we look at time, and we had cut out 8 hours of our journey. So for somebody to then tell me, that these things are not possible, I'm not going to talk about other experiences, but people have to understand that we can't continue to act like God is envious of human beings having this kind of experience. And the people who are talking like that are people who are not having the experience. The people are having these experiences all over the world. So either the church comes in term and start explaining instead of always giving it to the devil. This must be something that God inserted in creation and in nature that God left as a testimony so that people can have an experience of him. So that when we talk about Jesus walking through doors, through closed doors, people are not going to say that's crazy.
Right.
So if we talk about Philip disappearing, that is going through, that is 1 minute he's here and they watch him disappear. And he shows up in another place, and with the Ethiopian eunuch, he's sitting over there with him, and he's baptizing him, talking to him, and he disappears. He's looking at the guy, and the guy disappears. He goes invisibility, boom, and he's someplace else. And the Bible says he went back to Samaria.
Right.
So, and from that testimony, we know it did not just happen to Philip, because we can talk about how did somebody like Paul travel throughout that known world with all the things that were happening to Christians and all the stuff that was going on, and was able to go from one place to another.
Right. And when you were talking about earlier about the Enochian generation, I mean, we have to come to the fact that means, one, we are going to experience these things showing up.
Yeah.
And two, we need to wise up and be ambassadors to them the same way he was, right?
To be ambassadors to humanity first.
Ambassadors to humanities first. But also because a lot of times the first reaction we have as a species is to go, okay, we need to kill this. We react. We want to, and especially Christians. Oh, that has to be demonic. They have to be evil. Whatever. Who are they? Instead of saying, okay, what do we need to do? How do we look at these other people before?
I think the way we need to deal with this is to say that it is possible that angels are visiting more and more people in this generation. That we are not just talking about aliens, because we're not using the word aliens. We miss the point.
But doesn't alien just mean not from this place? Because angels are aliens.
I know. But most people, when you say aliens now in America, it's like strange head-looking people.
Let's call them extraterrestrials.
Well, we're going to call them angels, because I think we need to maintain the biblical term. We've got them angels. We say, I saw a seraphim,
or a messenger
from God, or someone from another from heaven, because heaven is not just a small room and up there.
Right. So
I think that one of the problems, and I know many evangelicals will have with them problem with the term, but I want them to understand that some of the people you're calling angels may actually be beings that come from other planets that came here. Call them angels if you want to. So call them ET. You like to call them ET.
I like to call them ET. ET phone home. Yeah. But let's just say 5 guys show up at your house tomorrow. 5 different species. That
would just be like Abraham when this guy showed up in front of his house.
Yeah, but some people would get the shotgun out, and that would be their first reaction, because they assume these things must be evil or whatever, because of maybe the way Hollywood has Hollywoodized consciousness with how they've affected people's reaction with that. But what would be a smart way of
I think that the key to this is we need to begin to, as believers, we need to begin to pray, and we have a word: test every spirit.
Right.
If this universe, the whole universe God created, was created by the Son, through the Son, through the Messianic principle. If it was created through the Messiah, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God, then there is not a place in the universe, there's not a place in the heavens that the Son of God is not known. The monogenes, the only begotten, is not known. Because all creation comes, angels, every angel should know. So the key issue for us as humanity is, since Christ loved us and gave his life for us, is he becomes the litmus test for every being that wants to deal with us.
That's good. And the last thing I kind of want to ask you before we wrap this up, I think another thing that's online and a lot of people are experiencing and noticing is there's a lot of teaching of just the imagination and going into that, and then that is heaven, and Jello World and all these other places.
Why are you trying to cause trouble?
I'm gonna cause trouble because that's what I do. So what do we just kind of just ignore that and just let it fade in its way, because it's growing essentially?
I think people who are falling into that are again falling into ethnocentrism, because it carries with it a certain ethnocentrism,
right,
and carries with it a certain nationalism.
Right.
that ignores the involvement of our brothers and sisters from all over the world.
Right.
Because when you look at those stories, the only people that are seen in heaven are mainly Americans.
Right. Christopher Reeve.
So if it's only Americans in heaven, then what happened to the rest of the world?
Right.
And the fact that Christianity came to America later than most places in the world.
Right.
So where are the Syrians, the ancient Syrian Christians?
Right.
Where are the ancient Persian Christians? Where are the Indian Christians that Thomas led to Christ? Where are the guys from Serbia and Slovenia and all this area that were believers? Ethiopia.
Yeah.
Where are those guys? You know?
Yeah.
So that's the problem. Problem is when we become so unscientific and so unbiblical that we are talking about things that the Bible does not even hint at.
Right.
Now, we do know there's a place in scripture where it says that the elders of Israel went up and they ate with the Lord and they did all that stuff. But that does not mean that heaven is America and that it's patterned after America.
Right.
You know, it's not patterned after China either, because the Chinese have the same kind of thing. It's not patterned after Africa, because the Africans think that it's not patterned about, it's the heavens are God's, and there are so many dimensions in heaven.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and that if you're not looking at humanity and the creation in total, and you're looking at it from a tribalistic perspective, then you begin to talk about all these guys who are doing this are actually showing that they don't understand kingdom principle, that they are looking at the kingdom mainly from a nationalistic and ethnic perspective.
Right. And another thing that happens a lot with that too is people say, well, look, this person went to heaven. This is the new thing now. Oh, I went to heaven. I saw blank. I had a vision. I saw blank. I had a dream. I had blank. And then people are basing their their arguments or their foundation of a certain idea based off these other people, what they're experiencing.
I think that the first principle is to distrust the things you see
Right.
when you supposedly go to heaven when you have never left your body.
Right. And I think that's the issue. And they say they're leaving their body. But they're not.
If you're operating from imagination, it's great because it's helping you and you can see things in heaven.
Right.
See stuff as another thing to go there.
Right.
You know.
It's not really receiving from your inner eye.
Yeah. So.
Okay. Well, thanks everyone. Thanks, Dr. O. You're amazing. And
you just got me in trouble today.
I got in trouble.
I'm saying a lot of stuff I don't want to say in public.
Yeah, well, it's good.
Yeah,
all right.
God is good.
All right. Blessings, everyone. All right. Thank you.
Thank you. Whew. That's a lot of work. But